It's November 6th, 2017 at 7:05 PM, and this is the Planning Board. Welcome. The first item on our agenda this evening is the discussion of draft zoning articles for town meeting 2018 and a possible vote to refer these zoning articles to the Board of Selectmen. And this refers to the use table and parking, which we've already had one meeting to discuss these for. The use table and parking, floodplain protection overlay district, common driveways, and definitions. Mary, our Director of Community Planning, is going to walk us through these zoning bylaws.
Thank you,
zoning
Jen.
Articles.
As you mentioned, the board did review these word by word at the meeting of October 23rd. So the purpose of tonight's discussion is to hone in on language that you may consider to refer upstairs for the selectmen for inclusion in the warrant. And your deadline is December 1 for that. The first one, use table and parking. This is, would you like me to read through the intent, Madam Chair, or through the language, or? What's the best?
Why don't we start with the intent and then the language?
So the intent of this, staff sees this as somewhat of a cleanup article. The content in section 3A 4.18 dates back to when the Board of Appeals regulated parking with a special permit A2. In 2010, the Planning Board began regulating parking with a special permit A3. This section wasn't changed, likely a simple oversight. So staff is recommending that the language in 3A 4.18 be deleted and that language be put in there saying intentionally left blank. The reason being is that if we do renumbering and there's any... It's not working.
No.
Okay. Thank you. Oops. Okay. So the reason being is that if we do renumbering, we could create other reference inconsistencies within the bylaw. That the language from that section is being incorporated into the bylaw under what we're calling item 3. And then the last revision within this section is to clearly state that the planning board may grant waivers to the design standards with a special permit A3. This has always been the practice of the planning board, so this is adding clear detail to the bylaw, basically around what the planning board already does. And so I can read through it if you want. Will the town amend the zoning bylaw of the town of Hingham adopted March 10, 1941 as heretofore amended as follows? Item 1, by amending section 3A to delete the content in 3A 4.18 and insert intentionally left blank. Item 2, by amending section 5A2 to insert, quote, comma, or deviating from the design standards specified by this section 5A, end quote, after, quote, 5A, end quote, in the second sentence. And item 3, by amending section 5A2 to insert, quote, or across the street from it, provided that service operations are not performed at the parking area, end quote, after contiguous parcel, or act on anything related thereto. There wasn't a great deal of comment at the October 23rd meeting, so this is actually verbatim what you heard at that meeting.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have any public comment on this particular zoning article? Okay, hearing none. I would ask my board if we have any discussion or if there's any comments or questions that anyone has.
I don't have any.
Yeah, I don't have it either. I think this is a good article. It's something that's going to be useful to the board with our parking determinations, and I would move that we advance it to the Board of Selectmen for consideration.
I would second that. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thank you, Mary.
The second one is Floodplain Protection Overlay District. And the intent of this is, we feel still somewhat of a cleanup. So the changes in this section, in the top paragraph section, where all the map panels are named, are to correctly reference the firm panels and their revised to dates. There have been some letters of map revision, and it came to our attention that we could be naming our firm panels more appropriately. And so that suggestion for that language comes from the Conservation Department, from their discussions with the state. And so we see that as just accuracy and clarity in how we reference the firm panels. Items 2 and 3 that are before you are deleting the date and changing the sentence within that section of the bylaw, because we have more than one letter of map revision that we're referencing, so it's just making that a plural reference.
Yep.
And then item 4, we have a map error that we need to rectify. And so zoning Part B map, which is the map that shows the floodplain districts, is going to be modified this year within the bylaw. We provided the board and on the website and for advisory a copy of the map as revised to incorporate the changes. The changes include correctly showing a portion of a flood zone that was identified as a velocity zone instead of an AE zone. And so we need to make that correction on our map within our bylaw. And then also to then change the dates and the metadata at the bottom of the map to match the way that we're naming the panels.
Right.
So it sounds very technical, but we see it as basically correction and clarity to the map.
And I remember we discussed at the last meeting that this simply changes it within the zoning bylaw, that the actual maps, as far as the insurance and federal government were concerned, were accurate, and that the residents that are listed here or that were affected, we notified them.
Correct. So that's two very good points. This is the map within our bylaw, but the map on our website and the FEMA map panels, which are the governing documents, have been accurate the whole time. Where the error came into play is how this little area was shown within our computer mapping. It's a topology error.
Right.
So that's a good point. We still did send a letter out, which we copied the board and advisory, and it's on our website, to the property owners that were affected. And when I say affected, they were involved in the error in how their data was shown in our zoning bylaw, but there was no impact on them, no detrimental effect. However, because we're talking about them, we did send them a letter. Not one person has reached out to the town to even ask any questions about the letter that we sent them.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mary.
Just for people watching, could you, I know we talked about it at the last meeting, but could you explain what the acronym FIRM panels are?
It's
Federal insurance.
the flood insurance rate maps. Yeah, and that's basically the FEMA document that shows the relative risk level for properties based on the flood elevations, which can change.
Do we have anyone here who's interested in giving public comment or has questions on this particular zoning article? Okay, there being none, do you all have questions, concerns,
No.
discussion? Okay, then I would make a motion that we advance this proposed language, this zoning article, to the Board of Selectmen for inclusion in the warrant.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mary.
Yep. The next one is common driveways. And I have a revised printout for the board.
Great, thank you.
Slightly changed from what I gave you last week.
Thank you.
And so this article has some clarification, suggestions, So let's begin with items 1 and 2. Items 1 and 2 relate to suggested waiver provisions being added to this section. Staff has suggested that the language be added for a couple of reasons. Because many people that come in to talk to staff about filing for a common driveway application find that for different reasons, they may not be able to meet the design standards within your bylaw. And the relief that they would have to seek would be in the form of a variance. We did not build in a waiver provision within this section. Like in your parking bylaw, you can do parking waivers. There's not that relief in here. So if somebody doesn't follow the letter of the regulation, they need a variance. So all of a sudden, for someone who's just looking to do something minor with their driveway, they're faced with a special permit A3 and a site plan, and then maybe variances. And as the board is aware, variances are not guaranteed. It's a different burden of proof. So staff suggested that the board might want to have a conversation around inserting a waiver provision. At the meeting of October 23rd, some board members did raise questions about that and were not completely supportive. And I will tell you that I have heard from Gary Tondorf-Dick. He's ill tonight, but he asked me to relay to the board that he has not changed his position with regard to that matter. Okay. So that would be that matter. Item 3, staff is suggesting some clarification language around clarifying what the access road is. The access road is the driveway from the point where it only serves one house or structure to the structure. The access road may have some portion on another lot, so staff and the fire prevention officer feel that the easement requirement should cover not only the common driveway, but the access road. And just for the sake of providing a little more background on this, the common driveway serves more than one, but not more than 3 lots. Access roads is somewhat of a term of art within the fire code, and that relates to the point where a singular driveway for your house breaks off from that common driveway and then extends up to your house. And so when we say in this section access roads, we're actually talking about an access road as in the fire code. And these standards about minimum pavement width relate back directly to input from fire prevention. And so staff is suggesting that kind of broadened language here, partially because as the board has considered some common driveways, it became evident that that wasn't clear. So we're proposing that language. The next comment is item 4, and item 4 talks about adding as amended after Chapter 18. 527 CMR 1.00 Chapter 18 is fire code. And it just changed. So that's kind of we just figured let's put in the as amended, because ultimately the planning board, if you chose to have a lesser requirement in here, you could. When it came down to the fire department issuing a permit, they might require more anyway. Then in the next item, item 5, we're suggesting that the requirement for Cape Cod berms be reduced to 12 inches instead of 18 inches in width. And for the board's reference, this is something that staff has been running into with subdivisions and all sorts of projects in town, and really industry standards is to have less pavement rather than more. Hingham still requires an 18-inch Cape Cod berm within our subdivision standards, but most towns do not on the South Shore. Staff is currently compiling a list of suggested items for the board to look at under your rules and regs, and that would be one of them, to consider reducing that. I will also just note that within most of the subdivisions the board has heard recently, that's been a waiver that's been requested and granted. Because the pavement width is the roadway, and then you have the Cape Cod berm. do you, when you have a 22-foot roadway, do you really need an extra 1.5 feet on each side, or is a foot sufficient? So staff is suggesting that modification here. We think that it's in line with other positions the board has taken in town. Item 6 is to insert or access road after driveway, and that's where we're talking about the requirement for an emergency turnaround after 150 feet in length. And we comment on requiring that for the common driveway. And when I sat down with the fire prevention officer, he said that fire code is requiring that within the, for access roads as well.
So in that case, okay, that's.
Sure, of course.
So if you've got a 200-foot common driveway and then a 200-foot access road off of that, they would both need turnarounds. Is that what that means?
They, in theory, the language in the bylaw already says, turnarounds for emergency vehicles shall be provided in locations approved by the fire department. I will tell you that, obviously, not talking out of school, sometimes for driveways for one house. So once you get off of the common driveway and you're just on, Susie homeowner's driveway, the fire prevention officer will occasionally waive that requirement if the house is sprinklered. So it becomes a discretionary thing.
Right, that's up to them.
That's up to them. Now, that's a good point to bring up. Maybe this language in this one needs to be softened. Because technically, even if they waived it, you would still be requiring it, unless you had a waiver provision in this section. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of approved by the fire department, would we say as required by the fire department? Or is that,
Yeah.
If we say as required, though, it would,
is that giving too much?
which I think, I'm okay with that. I think it's good to give public safety as much deference as we can with some of these unique common driveways, but we would give them, they could veto the entire thing, but, right?
Yeah.
As required,
Yeah, I mean,
which I'm okay
I
with.
think I was asking a question a
They're very
little differently than maybe
Yeah.
it was heard, right? I was trying to make sure that it didn't say that that the turnaround was either on the access road or the common driveway.
It's every 150 feet.
It is, okay.
It is every 150 feet. Our language before just dealt with the common driveway.
Right,
Now, after you permitted the common driveway, when the house was being built, fire department would have piggybacked on you and said, by the way, you need to provide a turnaround here. At that point, the homeowner might say, if I provide a sprinkler for the house, do I still need to have that turnaround? But that's fire department purview. That's not planning board purview.
Right, but then the fire would say yes, and they would draw their. they
Well,
would-
fire
they
department would make
withdraw
the
their
most
objection.
appropriate
Yeah, they would
decision
withdraw
based
their
upon
objection
the
to
facts in front of them.
Right,
And that's not our purview.
right.
So I guess,
So maybe approved by the fire department is fine. Maybe we don't need to change that language.
no, we can, I wasn't suggesting a change.
so that would be that one. And item 7 is looking at the last sentence. And so and so is item 8. We're looking at the common driveway easement and agreement. And any common driveway that's newly approved requires to have easement and agreement documents filed. And these proposed revisions speak to the last sentence because the language originally said, approved legal documents shall be recorded prior to the issuance of a building permit for any building to be served by the common driveway. And the intent of the provision is to recognize those situations where a driveway or may be built prior to any building permit. And the goal of this revision is to ensure that the easements and agreements and legal documents are recorded prior to the start of construction, whether or not the house is being constructed right now. Or the building, right? It could be a commercial common driveway.
Yep, that makes
So that's the intent of those changes. And the biggest discussion was about items 1 and 2 with the board at the last meeting, and that's a board decision.
Yep, okay. Does anyone here have public comment or question on the common driveway zoning article? Okay, then let's talk about this as a board. Let's start with the items 1 and 2, the issue of whether or not we want to have a waiver provision built in to the common driveway, to construction and design standards.
So, my initial thoughts are, the current process for getting a common driveway, and Mary talked about it, the A3 with the site plan review and potentially a variance. So if neighbors are supportive of this, the request for common driveway generally would get approval through the boards. I don't think we've ever overly conditioned site plan review or denied an A3 where you have abutters coming in and saying, not only are we in favor of this, we're going to use it, or supportive of it, X, Y, and Z. And a variance does offer abutters who would be opposed to this extra legal protections that they normally wouldn't get. I mean, as we all know, the board, we can't deny site plan review, we can just impose reasonable conditions on it. So I like the fact that abutters would have extra protection through the variance relief. Now, what I thought about after that last meeting we had on this issue was, even if abutters are petitioned the zoning board of appeals in favor of a variance, there are a lot of situations where the request just simply does not meet the legal requirement for a variance. The hardship's not there, or the lot shape isn't there, or the topography just completely excludes the application. So after I thought about it, I'm like, well, even if you had people who wanted to share the common driveway, use it, and benefit from it, the ZBA could impartially look at that and say, well, this doesn't even come close to a variance because there really is no legally defined hardship. So I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I'd like to hear other people's thoughts.
Gordon?
No, I think those are good points, and I think this is the section that Gary had a particular issue, if I recall. So, I will confess I haven't obviously seen as many of these as the other folks have, but I'm certainly sympathetic or receptive to what Gary had said previously and what Bill just said here. Is I don't know, if we don't do that, we don't do the rest. Is that right? Or
So the board could take a couple of different steps, if I may, or do you?
Yeah, no, let me just say what I think first. Thank you, Mary. So I think I still feel the same as I did the last time we met, which is that I think that it's possible that you have seen, Mary, because you see the applications that come in and get turned away, or people change their mind, or whatever ends up happening, but they don't pursue it, and we don't see them. And if we are, I mean, I said the same thing last time, but I'm going to repeat myself. If part of our purpose of passing this bylaw, as outlined in section 1, is not being met, and I think if you spend the next year or some period of time capturing that data for us, anonymously, generally, you don't, obviously, you want to handle that appropriately, but it would help us, I think. It's a big decision to make, whether we're going to lower the threshold from a variance to a waiver. And so I think that if there's a case to be made, I think that I'm sure we could all be convinced, but I think until that case is made, it's always that balance between turning, maybe it's unfortunate if people can't take advantage of it, but maybe that's not a reason to change the waiver without understanding the why, and I think building a case for it. So I would suggest that, consistent with Gary's concerns, we don't include items 1 and 2, and that we ask you to continue to monitor this as it comes in for us.
And I know you talked about this at the last meeting, but the people where you explained the process to and kind of said, okay, thanks, but no thanks, were they concerned about objections from abutters, or did they think that the process is too involved, too tedious, and they didn't want too much work for them?
So I can't, tell you exactly what the decision points were, but one application would have needed a somewhat of a variance on almost every design standard. Right, it was an existing driveway that they wanted to modify, and they would have had to, and get the legal documents filed, but that's a high burden if you need 8 variances and a special permit and a site plan. And it wasn't, that one wasn't
That's-
that
that's like-
objectionable. I mean, it was, Hingham is a unique town with lots of existing situations, and no two are alike. So I would certainly be happy to capture the metrics. And sometimes it's just the applicant's decision point. I mean, having a survey done, right, of a property can be expensive. So some applicants will come in and find out that threshold, and that's enough.
for them to say, no, thanks.
And then the decision fees and 2 to 3 months worth of hearings by the time we advertise, and, it can be a lot for a homeowner.
So what was your suggestion, that we
So that we
hold off on 1 and 2?
hold off on 1 and 2 and
move
continue to,
forward.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Do you think, Mary, if we did that, could we put something together that would still work? Or-
Yeah, I mean, the rest are just, they're all just kind of, the rest of them don't depend on that, right? So if the board was comfortable with the rest of them, you could, advance the language excluding those. I can also revise this and put this back on the November 27th agenda, since
that
you don't
would
have
be
a full
cleaner.
board here. That might be
that would be
cleaner,
cleaner. What do you think?
and give Gary a chance to
Yeah,
opine on it.
yeah, I think that would be more straightforward.
Yep.
Excellent. What about any further discussion on some of these other items? I mean, I happen to think they all seem like good changes, especially item 5, and we keep granting that Cape Cod berm waiver anyway, so that really just matches our practice.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the others makes good sense to me. I don't know if they warrant any further discussion.
No, I think that
None
would
from
be-
me, I think
Okay.
it's, yeah.
So we'll pick this one up then, Mary, on the 27th. Thank you.
All right, and then the last one in the first 4 is definitions. And this is, last year at town meeting, the planning board modified the lot shape provision and changed it to a lot width type of provision. And so the proposal is to simply take the definition for lot width that you adopted last year and insert it into the appropriate location within your definition section in the bylaw. So it's not new language, it's just copying it and pasting it into another section. At the last meeting, there was a suggestion from the board to clarify within the article where exactly it would be inserted in that section. So staff has modified that. So the proposal is to amend section 6 by inserting after the definition of lot line side, the following, quote, "Lot width, the horizontal distance between side lot lines measured parallel to the lot frontage," end quote, or act on anything related thereto.
Is there anyone here this evening that wants to comment or ask a question on this zoning article relating to definitions? Okay. I know we discussed this at length at our last meeting, but do we have any further issues that we want to discuss on this tonight?
I do not.
No?
No, I had a question at the time, but I think it was answered,
Okay.
just about the primary
All right.
linkage.
Well, then I will make a motion that we advance the proposed language of the definition zoning article to the Board of Selectmen.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
And just for clarity, that's advancing it for inclusion in the warrant.
Sorry, yes, thank
Correct.
you. Thank you, Mary, yes. It's for inclusion in the warrant. Great, okay. That moves us along to the next item on our agenda, which is the discussion of the draft accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So we have, at recent planning board meetings, twice gone over sort of the background of why we're here again. Just to quickly encapsulate that for those of you who are here tonight, this is a topic that the town has thought about several times in the past, most recently with a study committee that looked at this issue for 14 meetings and came up with some draft zoning bylaw language, which never went to town meeting. And so we are once again looking at this issue and as a planning board, deciding if we're going to put something forward to the Board of Selectmen for the warrant. Thank you. And so that's what we're doing tonight. How I want to do this tonight, I think, is to actually get public comment first. We have, what we're going to do is take the work product that last study committee 2 years ago finished with, and that's going to be our starting point. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. A lot of good work was done, and what we aim to do is not, cut from whole cloth once again. So we're going to start by getting public input, which is probably why some of you are here tonight, and hear what the town has to say on accessory dwelling units generally. Then we're going to talk about our process and where we want to go from here, with the understanding that if we do vote to put something forward by December 1st to the Board of Selectmen, we would be engaging in our typical public hearing process starting in January, at which time we would go through the zoning bylaw amendment that's proposed in great detail, and potentially fine-tuning or adjusting. But we don't aim to do that tonight, and we don't aim to have a very long substantive discussion about the accessory dwelling units this evening. We have asked Real Estate Town Council to give us her thoughts, comments, and questions on the work product from the last working group, and we will go from there as part of our roadmap in terms of coming up with our next work product. So with that being said, I would invite anyone who has public comment or question on accessory dwelling units to come forward if there's anyone. No? Okay. Oh,
Can I ask
please.
a question just as to why it didn't
Can you step
progress?
up to the mic, please?
Yeah, sorry.
What's that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's okay,
I'm
yeah.
Mary Whitfield with the Patriot Ledger. I was just wondering why this didn't progress in 2015. I was not around then.
I was around.
Yeah, I was not
Mark,
either.
Mark was actually on the committee. Mark, thanks for coming tonight, too. Yeah, so, do you want to speak? Or do you want me to?
Sure. I'm Mark Cullings, 44 Spring Street, and was a member of the working group. So I'm glad to see this being taken up again. You have two new members. Bill, you were here, part of the last discussion. Gary was, and Sarah was as well. So I gather you have a draft bylaw. Frankly, when we adjourned, when we adjourned after hundreds, if not thousands of person hours being put into this, frankly, it was one of the most frustrating processes that I've ever been involved in anywhere. We really, I think, began to scratch the surface and discover just how complicated this was. For me personally, I think, I know you have, and you've put on the website, Catherine Salisbury's comments at the last meeting, which in a way synthesized quite a lot of the complexities of the matter in a way that had not been brought up through all of the meetings that we had had. And I wish that she had been had discovered more positive aspects of the process. But I left with the clear realization that if this ADU bylaw was to be advanced, it really should require an evaluation or examination of all of the zoning bylaws that are related to multifamily dwellings. And maybe I'm incorrect, but that seemed to be one of her primary concerns, and it had come up in bits and pieces in earlier meetings. The 1941 exemption, pre-1941, ability to convert a 6-room home into a 2-family. I don't know how many times I said a two-family dwelling is not an ADU. Didn't seem to, I may have said it as many times as Gary Tondorf Dick said unintended consequence, but I'm not sure. That seemed to be the chorus, unintended consequence. What we do know is from the research 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, the Pioneer Institute had done, and I haven't looked it up to see if they've done an updated survey, but many of the communities that share similarities with Hingham have ADU bylaws, and in the course of that research, I talked to maybe a half dozen town planners about the success of their ADU bylaw and discovered virtually no difficulties with them. But that all may have changed. Airbnb is a whole new thing. And when we are considering, it didn't exist. Maybe it did, but we didn't know about it 2 years ago. But that would certainly be a factor that has to be taken into consideration with this. I'm a property rights guy, and I think Hingham is unreasonably restrictive with what a property owner may do with his or her property in this town. We have an aging population, and the ability of a family to allow an in-law to continue to live in the home is important. Public safety, the fact that we know by rumor, common knowledge, that there are many unauthorized ADUs in existence in this town. If the house burns down, the fire department doesn't know who's in the house. And these are things that are very important, substantive public issues to be discussed. And I'm glad to see the discussion reopened. And I guess I don't understand. I don't know how far along the road you are, but if you're contemplating putting another committee together, let me back up. I'm concerned about the timeline. It's November. We started in November 3 years ago. We didn't make it because we got there, with staff work and volunteer work. We kept turning up new things and things that needed answering. And if in fact it's going to be an examination of other zoning bylaws, then it's is it something that's reasonably done and done well in time for the 2018 town meeting, or should it begin and be thought about as a 2-year project? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do think it's an important piece of legislation to carefully consider, get it right, and satisfy Gary's unintended consequence comment. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very good.
I will say that in terms of timing, we certainly understand that it is November. We don't intend to form a new committee at this point. We are going to be the folks who, if we vote to put something forward to the Board of Selectmen for the warrant, we will then be conducting the public hearings in January and February. And we would stand on the shoulders of your committee and start from where you left off.
Thank you. That makes more sense to me. The other committee was too big. There were a lot of well-intentioned people. I mean, everyone sitting around the room but it was, big committees are unwieldy. 5-person committees can be unwieldy, but 15-member committees are tough to work with. So if you provide the guidance and the leadership and get input from people who wish to do that, more power to you. So great.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment now that it's been started? Thank you.
read this?
Yes, and will you just state your name and address for the record, please?
Beth Rouleau, 14 Prospect Street. I just wanted to echo some of your comments. I actually tried to get involved through Laura Marwell with your committee, and I was in the midst of getting my graduate degree in gerontology, which I'm finishing next month, and I've done a lot of research on ADUs, and I did presentations on ADUs. I think they are a huge, important part of what's happening in this country with demographics. The population is aging so rapidly, and alongside that, people are living longer with a lot of chronic health conditions. So even if you look at statistics for Alzheimer's disease, people are going to be looking for this type of arrangement to live with the support of their family. I don't know exactly if you looked only at attached ADUs, but the standalone ADUs are another huge market. There's a company building med cottages, which have all this functionality in them to, have somebody in there that has health issues. The floors light up when you get out of bed. They're rubber floors. There's just so many exciting things going on in this industry. And then just, again, you said it's been a couple years. I have some current information because I'm working in aging services right now. I'm actually also the chair of Hingham's Council on Aging. So I have a lot of statistics about the population in Hingham. I know right now we're at 26% of Hingham is over the age of 60. In 10 years, it's going to be 40-something%. So it's a huge demographic, and it's the era of aging with the baby boomers. So it's not going away, and I think this is a force that is going to really support people aging in place, and having the support systems. You can look at, the cost structures of ADUs versus institutional care. I mean, there's just so many things that point to the importance. But the last comment I wanted to make is I was able to see a couple weeks ago, it's a draft paper only, so I don't have the authority to share it, but it's a study that was done that looked at probably 15 towns, like out on 128. And it was done by the Board of Health of a town that is basically just a little bit ahead of where Hingham is probably with this. And the findings are really reassuring. So the concerns that people had and the population, they're worried about traffic and the bus stop and all this stuff. All the towns that were surveyed that have had these in place are reporting no negative feedback, no problems. And I think the bottom line is it really is going to come down to how the bylaw is drafted and how it's enforced. And one other point that you had mentioned, like the fire department, coming to a home, that one of the comments that came out of that draft report was that towns that have illegal accessory dwelling units are going to become safe and brought up to code because of this. Because every community that we've looked at and through my job, and they exist even though they're illegal. So that's not a good thing either. So anyway, I'm very supportive of it, and interested in kind of following. And I think I was in touch earlier too, because
thank
Tom,
you.
so that's why I came
Appreciate
here.
you coming. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? Okay. All right, good. So then, for my board, as I said earlier, as you know, and I think you're just getting it tonight, we asked Susan Murphy, special town council for real estate and land use, to look at the work product of the committee, the study group that Mark was on, and to sort of just try to, for us, come up with questions and comments and ways to think about it. And what we also have here is the model bylaw promulgated by the state, it looks like, for accessory dwelling units, which gives additionally really good information on what a typical accessory dwelling unit bylaw looks like, which is another good roadmap. So the question before us tonight, I suspect that we would all agree that we're not going to go through this in great detail and debate the merits of each provision, especially without Gary here. I mean, Gary drafted this with the committee. But to the extent that we want to put something forward at town meeting, I guess, the suggestions Mary has been helping in terms of a process that we can pursue, and the suggestion right now is that we come up with a broad enough, start with this, the work product that we have in front of us, make it sufficiently broad to potentially vote on it, to send it upstairs for the warrant. And then, as I said earlier, starting in our January hearings, get into the real meat and potatoes discussion and solicit even more public comment and go through this line by line. That being said, I would suggest that we perhaps rework it a bit first. I think that in its current form, I think the message is clear. I think that, as town council points out, there are some structural issues, there are some issues with, certain things need to be moved around. So what I would suggest, and I'll see what you think, but is that we maybe ask staff to sort of rework it more into the format of the model bylaw, but not losing any of the meaningful substance, like, keeping the intent and the provisions just as they are, but perhaps making it into a bit of a more user-friendly format.
Sure. I do have just a quick procedure question, and, as I said at the last meeting, I would like to have this debate at town meeting, and as a community decide, do we or do we not want this, and just let everybody speak on it, those in favor, those against, and have that decision made at town meeting. However, Mark made a good point about if we start broad and we start with ADUs and we advance or not advance something on the 27th, would be able to scale it back as we go. So if we push forward ADUs and then, as Mark pointed out, hey, this is kind of big, maybe we need some more time to study this and get this right, and then we pull it back and say, well, let's look at the 41 provision instead, then maybe this year. And take a smaller bite now. Could we do that as we move through the public hearing process? Would that be procedurally, would that create problems?
Do you want me to?
Please, yeah, go right ahead.
So, this ADU draft that's in front of us, and it will be on the website before I leave tonight, the office. This covers ADUs within the principal dwelling and within the accessory building. So if the board started with, I'm so sorry. So this draft bylaw covers ADUs within the principal structure and within accessory buildings. So speaking to scope, if the board were to tell staff, Mary, could you rearrange this material without taking out anything substantive, but just kind of put it into a format that is more similar to our existing bylaw, so that it just flows like the rest of our document? We could do that, and we could send it upstairs. If the board wanted to narrow the scope or scale it back, I think that you could scale it back by saying, we're only going to talk about maybe within the accessory building, we're not going to do the principal dwelling, or vice versa. You could narrow this.
I'm talking post-December 1st.
Post-December 1st, you could still change it. You can narrow it. You cannot broaden it. But if you want to talk about, so if this board is saying, staff, we want to talk about the 1941 provision within the context of section 3A 1.2, which is that two-family conversion, you would need to send up an article about that, right? Because that's out of the scope. Accessory dwelling units is saying, should we allow this subordinate unit within either the principal dwelling or an accessory building? And if we're going to, how are we going to do it? And in what zones? The 1941 provision, which is in the two-family conversion, and I believe it's also in the bed and breakfast language, that's a separate bylaw. Now, if this board wants to have that conversation this year, whether or not it would, ultimately get withdrawn or whatever you choose to do come February or March, staff can prepare a bylaw for you to advance to have that conversation after December 1st. But that's, I think, outside the scope of this. They may be related,
Yeah, I see them as being related.
but I don't think that you could get to that within this. I think they're siblings.
Okay. Well, then,
Right.
why don't we go, that's great. Then why don't we go broad with the two, with I guess with one inside the unit and the accessory dwelling, And then if we have to scale it back, we certainly can. But again, I think we need to definitively say at town meeting, where do we stand as a community on this issue? Do we want them or do we don't?
Yep.
And then, because we've been discussing this for every year it comes up, 3 or 4 years. I think we owe it to people in town to have a vibrant discussion on it either way.
Well, and to all the folks that a couple of years ago spent all of those hundreds, borderline thousands of person like that, yeah, we owe it to them for all of that volunteer effort to take it up. I think, and again, I don't know if this falls into the procedure question. I totally agree that we start broad and then go from there. Somehow we need to convey that is our intent and that is the process that we're taking, rather than putting out something that says primary and accessory, and that's the proposed bylaw that the planning board is putting forward. I mean, it seems to be a fairly critical question, that people fall on one side or the other, and if it appears that the planning board, by putting that forward, is putting the thumb on the scale or one or the other, I just worry what the reaction would be. I just think that we should say that we're being intentionally broad and that we're going to be having hearings, and that what comes from those hearings will be determined what goes to town meeting. So that's more of a communications mechanism more than anything else, but I would just from, again, and reading minutes doesn't come nearly close to all of the experience that folks have had in the conversations that have gone on this issue. So I am still this smart on this issue, I think, but that seems to be an inflection point on all of these conversations, that and unintended consequences, I suppose. I would urge us to be kind of transparent on that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So the board, the way the process works broadly, and Bill, jump in and correct me, this board will vote to refer language upstairs. And then the selectmen will refer it back down to the planning board by December 10th, at which point I will do a legal notice to abutting towns, planning agencies, do a legal ad, and we will set the public hearings. And during the public hearing process, the board will wordsmith and fine-tune the language within these bylaws. Now, some of them admittedly need more than others. The planning board has the right to narrow the scope. So the planning board could theoretically vote to withdraw the article. They could vote to say, depending on how the hearings go, if the board felt that you only wanted to tackle part of it, you could narrow the scope yourself, as you proceed. That's within your purview, and then advisory, and then ultimately there'll be a determination on the language prior to the warrant.
And I see this as probably more than a couple of meetings in January where we would be talking about this at length, and engaging the public and, having good, healthy deliberations amongst ourselves to make sure that we go through it, with a fine-tooth comb, and that we, ultimately end up with a product, to your point, that we all support and actually, move forward at that point. Do our friends, go ahead.
The baseline work that has been done, Mark's right, some things have changed. Airbnb is a new thing that needs to be considered. But gosh, the amount of work and the amount of analysis that's been done, the research that's been done, the deliberations that we are building off of, give us a pretty good head start.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
Absolutely.
So
I was on the board in 2015. I think I might have been the chair that year. And I thought that committee put a tremendous amount of time, effort, hours into it. I remember Mark's right. I mean, they spent a couple Saturdays where they started probably at 9 and ended at 5 on a Saturday. So there was a tremendous amount of effort into it. And I think at the end, the deadline was approaching, and the committee just felt, hey, we're too big of an issue to tackle now. Why don't we just kind of wait and...
Which I respect, but must be frustrating, yeah.
Right. I'm wondering if our friends from advisory have any comment on the process that we're contemplating, simply because, no.
Process sounds like what you normally do.
Okay, thank you. Please, Mary.
So on the subject of Airbnb, staff had an opportunity to pick John Coughlin, town council's brain. And one of the things we talked about was Airbnb. And you may see within this draft bylaw in front of us a recommendation during your deliberations to put in requirements for minimum length of tenancy or minimum length of rental. Within this bylaw, Airbnb is a use. It would be a separate, probably zoning bylaw provision. There's one case going on now that I'm not sure is completed yet. And town council suggested, whereas that's something so new, that where it would likely be a bylaw revision, it might make sense to wait another year and let some of the court cases and precedents be set and let some other people test the water. So it's related to this, and you could put things in this to try to forestall these becoming that type of use. But it's probably going to be another bylaw revision in the future.
Right, okay. That's good input, thank you. So where does that leave us? It seems like we're on a similar page in terms of where to go from here.
But I did appreciate your point that we probably should wait to Gary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
27th, and, Gary has strong feelings on it.
Absolutely.
If Sarah's able to come back in time, I know she has strong feelings on it as
Yep.
well. So let's see what they have to say. I mean, we can wait till the 27th.
Oh, yeah, and we don't have anything that we would vote on anyway, because we're asking Mary to put
keep
something
working on
new
it, yeah,
together.
yeah.
But that does give enough time to get something up for the 1st, if we vote on the 27th.
Yes.
Okay.
The more difficult thing is to getting it ready by the
The
27th.
selectmen can always reopen the warrant too, right? I mean, they have the ability to reopen the warrant upon a request by a board.
So the selectmen do have the authority to reopen the warrant. That's not the preferred way to go forward. So if the board would like staff to take the language in front of us, not make any substantive changes, but rearrange the materials so that it's more following the format of your existing bylaw, I can do that by the 27th. And then that would be something that would be more in a format that if this board chose to advance that language, it would be ready for your vote. And then you would further work on it afterwards.
Right, okay. So if everyone's comfortable with that, then that will be our plan from here. Thank you, Mary.
Giving you a lot, Mary, this fall, between this and
Yeah, that's for sure.
marijuana. You have a lot going on.
Which we're discussing again tomorrow night.
Yeah, tomorrow night.
Everybody wants to
We'll
come
get
back.
in those emails for the second line.
Right. Okay, we're actually running a little early, but I don't think it will matter. The next two items on our agenda, we have requests to continue public hearing. So the first is 35 Hobart Street, Demos Realty Trust. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mike.
It's a request to continue the public hearing to December 4th, 2017, and extend the decision deadlines to December 26th, 2017. So I would make a motion that for 35 Hobart Street, we continue the public hearing to December 4th, 2017, and extend the decision deadline to December 26th, 2017.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then the next matter is, refers to a definitive subdivision at 170 Gardner Street, and we also have a request to continue public hearing. So I'll make a motion that we continue the public hearing for 170 Gardner Street to November 13th, 2017. And are we moving the decision date on that one, Mary?
No, that decision date's fine for now.
Okay, so the motion is simply to move the public hearing date to November 13th, 2017.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. So then our next items are administrative reports.
Okay, I have a couple for you. First of all, it's that time of year, conflict of interest, and I have two different things, and one I'm going to pass down to you. This is the summary of the conflict of interest
Thank
law. And the very last page, if you could just rip it off and sign it and pass it back down, that's just confirming that you received this, and then I know you will all read it. And I will email you the link. There's also like an online thing to go through for public employees. I think I already have somebody's. Yours?
Yeah, because I had to do it for my day job, and so I think it's good regardless.
Oh, wow.
right? So I had,
Nice.
Yes. We are grateful that you do it once. That's good.
I also want to note that my colleagues should be aware of this as well as people on the boards. The Mass State Ethics Commission does have an attorney that is kind of like the attorney of the day. And you can call them with questions, and, they get right back to you, answer any questions. I had called them recently on an issue, and they gave me really good advice, and it's a great resource. Not only did they, give me an opinion on something, they also cited the Mass General Law, and it's a resource, a really great resource to have when, you have questions about things.
Agreed, I've used them as well.
Thank you.
All right, and so the other kind of administrative thing that I have is discussion of meeting schedule, everybody's favorite topic. And I wanted to ask the board if you are able to add a meeting for December 18th, and that would be for applications.
Yes, for me.
Certainly if we don't have to have it, but I think that you will. And then my other question for you, and that's a Monday night. So staff will, if it's not indicated clearly, we won't schedule it, but I need to know if it's an option for the board.
Looks to me to
Yes.
me, yep.
Yeah, fine, works for me.
Yes.
It's a Monday night?
It's a Monday night. Yeah. And then the other question that I have for you is, in January, the first Monday in January is a holiday. So looking ahead till after the holidays, if we go from December 20th to January 8th, that's a 3-week time span. Typically, the planning board would open the public hearings for the bylaws on January 8th, your first Monday. Given the substance of some of your bylaw discussions, I wanted to ask the board if, again, if I need to advertise for a hearing, would the board be receptive to a meeting on Tuesday, January 2nd, or Wednesday or Thursday that week, because Monday's the holiday. If you do bylaws on January 8th, which could take up the whole night, if you get into some of them, then you're waiting till, and I think the 15th is Martin Luther King Day.
Yes, it
So
is.
already like a 6-week span
Yeah,
without
no.
applications.
I can meet the second.
I'll make myself available.
That's the first Tuesday of the
It's
month.
a
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Oh, did you
Yeah.
have something that night?
We
We could do Wednesday.
My wife is on the rec commission. I meet the first
Oh,
Tuesday
yeah.
of the month, so if we could move it the Wednesday,
do
that'd be
Wednesday?
better.
I
Yeah,
can do
Wednesday or
Wednesday.
Thursday, better.
Now, the first Wednesday of the month sometimes has is that still okay for you?
For me? Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's a conflict I can work out.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
So I could have a quorum on the first Wednesday of the month.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. The
All
third.
right, so if indicated, and I can advertise applications, I appreciate your willingness and flexibility on that.
Did we,
It's gonna be a busy month.
did we add a meeting for the week of Thanksgiving?
No, this board has expressed a desire to not have a
Okay,
meeting that
just
week.
want to double check it. And I'm going to be away next Monday. Told you, okay,
The 13th, okay.
yeah.
And next Monday, we have a couple of hearings. So if you're going to be away next Monday, we will probably have to request LCB to continue because we need the 4 for the vote, and Bill can't miss another hearing on that. But I will also tell you that today is a week before the hearing, and they haven't submitted anything, so they're really not ready
Okay.
anyway. The other hearing that we have next week is the Veraki subdivision, and I'll have to check. You may have missed a hearing on that already. They're, just submitted revised material today. I actually have it here, but their Board of Health vote isn't until the following week.
Okay, so,
Paul Brogna's not even getting his material to review until tomorrow. So that's like 4 days before your hearing. Typically, the board requires more
Yep.
kind of time. So that could end up moving. And then we have 170 Gardner Street on next week. That was continued to next week from this week because they weren't ready. Today is a week before the hearing. I still have nothing submitted. I will check for the, sufficiency of the panel. I mean, it really comes into play the most on the A3. You can vote on a subdivision with a panel of 3. It just gets, when you get down to every panel is a panel of 3 and you have hard decision deadlines.
Yep.
Yep.
It can get tricky for scheduling.
Yeah.
I apologize, next
No,
next week, I'm working from my, the only rich uncle I have, Uncle Sam. I'm going to Fort Hood, Texas for the week, so, to do a commercial. So,
I think that might be less fun.
rich uncle I know.
He's a somewhat inflexible uncle as well.
Yes, he can be.
So I would ask Mary, I'm hoping that the 27th, I don't remember the agenda, I know you said there's something on that night, but we don't want to add too much else that night because we're going to need to deal with ADU bylaw and marijuana presumably.
So the 27th, you have potentially on for action the Oakwood Circle subdivision,
On for action.
Okay.
and that
Okay.
will probably take you a good hour
Okay.
to work through that, because you'll have to vote the waivers individually and then work through. It's looks like it would be ready for you to consider acting if you're
Okay.
ready,
Okay.
basically. And then you have the bylaws on that night. So I think that anything that gets bumped from,
If we bump things next week.
if we bump things from next week, we'd be bumping them to December 4th, which could just end up being a long meeting for folks.
Yeah, okay.
Because you already have, I think, 3 applications on that one.
Okay.
But, I mean, it is what it is, so.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so
Alright.
duly noted, I won't,
Well, I just think that we need to leave room. I don't want to give that short shrift that night. Maybe I'll be wrong, maybe there won't be that much discussion, but I suspect there will be.
the board has to act before December
Right,
1st,
that's
so
what I mean, we're not going to have
you'll
another
run
meeting
out
that
of
week.
evenings, you can
Right.
have more meetings, but.
But only so many.
Yeah.
And so is it clear to our, I know I always tell you, our friends from advisory, so tomorrow night we're meeting on marijuana, and then we don't have any other zoning bylaw meetings planned until the 27th, right, Mary?
Correct. Staff's direction is to revise the common driveway language. When I get it revised, I'll circulate it. Modify the ADU material, and I'm waiting for direction tomorrow night with regard to what the work program is on the marijuana. And I would just say that it's unlikely that the larger work products are going to come out that far in advance of the 27th.
It's okay. You have to have Thanksgiving.
We'll do our best on all counts.
Okay, thank you, Mary. All right. And do we not have minutes? Are we going to do minutes tonight?
I have 2 sets of minutes here, if the board would like to.
I think we,
Do
oh,
it.
it's you.
Awesome.
Are we
can
all
do
there?
it. Yeah.
I don't know if
Do
we have the right people.
Yep.
You
We
have to act
the right
on them
people
within a
this one.
month, so,
We do, well, we have 3,
awesome.
so we can
All
do
right,
it.
good.
Let me see the other one, hold on. Okay, the other 2.
Thank you. Let's want to look at October, we'll go in chronological
You
order.
emailed
Look
these
at-
out, right? So I
I
think the
did.
ones I looked at, yeah, so.
I have not looked at these, sorry. These are good? All right, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of October 23rd, 2017.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Let me just look quickly at this one. Okay, if you're ready, you're both already ready, okay.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
Make the motion, we approve the minutes of November 1st, 2017.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Great. And with that, we are adjourned.